Hello. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being there and doing the best we can according to, because of the circumstances. So I'm happy to see that you all seem to be well. I'm fine too. And how to say, this meeting has been cooking for a long time in different, how you say, considering different scenarios until finally arriving at this one. Um, I was, how you say, a workshop of 3 days, 2 hours per day, and how to organize it. Um, we decided to do it in three separate sessions. The first session today, one could say that it's a lecture format, but it's not a lecture format. Tomorrow there will be your time to present your practice, and then the third will be devoted to conversation, debate, proposals. So today was supposed to be a lecture format, but I want to say it is not really a lecture format, because what I want to do is just to throw at you some things that worry me, or that, how to say, that I have been thinking about for some time now, and try to just offer them to you for your consideration, so that we can discuss about them in these 3 days. I do not have privileged knowledge about them, but I believe they are very relevant. And of course, they have a relation to the subject of this symposium, the question of education and the art institution. So understand what I am now about to open a PowerPoint, and with different images and text. And so, as I said, the idea is to present to you several subjects that, that I think deserve attention in the way I see them, or in the way I understand them, and then just to propose this as a starting point to discuss, and outline the subject of this workshop. So I begin. I will still, as I say, it's really nice that you keep your camera if you can, because it's very strange to talk to nobody, and so it's nice to see that you are there and that you are listening, and more or less. Um, uh, if you can, of course, from time to time, I understand that you have to close it, but it's nice to know that I'm not speaking in the empty cyberspace. And well, so I'm going to share the screen and go to my, and of course as well, just whenever you have questions, I think there is a kind of protocol for the questions, but you can just ask them, go ahead, because sometimes if you wait until the end for questions, well, then somehow they are not so urgent anymore. So I don't know if we have this system that you can write them, or you can lift your hands,
Yeah.
or something like that. Okay, so I go for my PowerPoint, and this was the title: Comrade, Comradely Love and Changing an Institution from the Inside. So the thing starts with two cases which I find they are quite exemplary about institutions, changing institutions, the question of education, and who is the subject of this change of the institution. So one of the scandal or the polemic that really kept me thinking in the last months was the cancellation of the exhibition of Philip Gaston in several major museums, and the reason why this exhibition was cancelled. So here we have some of the polemic paintings by Philip Gaston with the Ku Klux Klan hooded figures, just a series of them. I think they are more or less in chronological order. And here this matter exposed: the Philip Gaston exhibition cancelled, postponed by the following directors of the following major museums: Kevin Feldman, director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, I believe; Frances Morris, director of the Tate Modern in London; Matthew Tettelbaum, Museum of Fine Art, Boston, and Gary Tinterow of the Museum of Fine Art, Houston. So they canceled an exhibition that had been on the make for 4 or 5 years. Then it was postponed for another 5 years. And was the reason they gave in a communique. Was we recognize that the world we live in is very different from the one in which we first began to collaborate in this project 5 years ago. The racial justice movement that started in the US and radiated to countries around the world, in addition to challenges of a global health crisis, have led us to pause. As museum directors, we have a responsibility to meet the very real urgencies of the moment. We feel it is necessary to reframe our programming and, in this case, step back and bring in additional perspectives and voices to shape how we present Gaston work to our public. That process will take time. As I was preparing my PowerPoint, I realized that this was an update of the first letter that was in June 2019. This is an update of September 21, 2020, because the original text said the show should be postponed until a time when we think the powerful message of social and racial justice at the center of Philip Gaston work can be more clearly interpreted. So this is, of course, much more interesting for our purpose because it underlines this idea of we think. So somehow all these directors, they thought that they had to create the optimal circumstances to understand the work of Philip Gaston, and those circumstances could not be created at that moment. And on September 25, Mark Gottfried was the curator of the International Art at the Tate Modern in London, published a post on his Instagram account where he criticized the museum decision to delay the exhibition and said, "Canceling or delaying the exhibition is probably motivated by the wish to be sensitive to the imagined reactions of particular viewers and the fear of protest. However, it is actually extremely patronizing to viewers who are assumed not to be able to appreciate the nuance and politics of Gaston works." So this is quite interesting from this point of view of the notion of education and mediation, this institution that decides that nor the circumstances nor the public is in the ideal disposition to witness supposedly polemic work. But what is, of course, curious is is that he was suspended for publishing this. In the same post, Geoffrey said that the curators had no say over the exhibition delay. He also appeared skeptical about the decision amidst the current political climate. 2020, which is the year where we are still in, it seems that it's never ending, it's a nightmare year. In the museum world, it has come to the point where major institutions have become scared of displaying or recontextualizing the work they had committed to for the programs. What do we want museums to do in turbulent times? And almost a month later, on October 28, Tate Modern suspended Gottfried from his post. So this is a bit also a way that we could title our discussion. What do we want museums, or what do we want the institutions to do in turbulent times? So a little bit of background on Philip Gaston, just a little bit, is that Philip Gaston, what I'm very attractive about Philip Gaston biography is that when he was a young man and an art student, he was an engaged artist who was creating murals to protest against state-sponsored violence, white supremacy, and censorship. Then he became a successful abstract painter following the steps of Pollock and others. And then he went back to figurative art. As a response to his political engagement, the paintings of the Ku Klux Klan are of this third period of Philip Gaston. So when he goes from abstraction back to figurative work. And the words of the daughter of Philip Gaston is, "My father violated the abstract art canon and held a mirror to white supremacist America." And this is, I put it very big because I like very much this quote of Philip Gaston, where he went back to figurative painting. He said, "What kind of a man am I," he asked, "sitting at home, reading magazines, going to a frustrated fury about everything, and then going into my studio to adjust a red to a blue." So indeed, Philip Gaston is a prototype of the politically engaged artist, still committed to painting with a very, how you say, an engaged but not polemic work, not especially polemic work. I never heard before, and I've been around for a while, that the work of Philip Gaston could be polemic in the sense that could offend anybody. This is something that somehow is a new reading of the work of Philip Gaston, and the kind of reading that has made that the exhibition was postponed or cancelled. In the exact opposite of this, there is another case, which is the case of the change of name of the Witte de With Contemporary Art Center in Rotterdam. So, which has been cooking for a long time as well, because Witte de With is a name that comes from the street where the center is placed, Witte de With Street. And this Witte Cornelis de With is the subject of a heated debate for centuries. He was seen as one of the greatest naval heroes in Dutch history. Today, though, we can also see the other side, the fact that his victories were built on oppression and colonial violence. So he was, like so many big men of the 17th century, his fortune and his wealth was based on the slave trade. So for years, the Witte de With Center of Contemporary Art was sort of ashamed of sponsoring this name, but never did the final step to rename itself. And so this was finally taken by the new direction of Witte de With, I guess, of course, based on preceding debates and preceding conversations of other directors of Witte de With. But it is now with Sofia Nadechongui that there was a very complex conversation among artists, museum goers, institutions on how this what could be a good name for this art center. And then finally, after many possibilities and different names, finally the name chosen was Meli, based on a work of Ken Lum, which is there since 1991. Millie Shum hates her job. And then from there came, this is the process of name change. And then finally to call itself Kunstinstituut Millie. And here we have this very symbolic pictures when we see the old sign of Witte de With pulled down. And instead of that, on the window, the new name, Millie Kunstinstituut, so Millie Art Institute, which is the new name of the Witte de With museum. So in this case, the change of name was, a process, a long process that was made in dialogue with almost every possible user of the art space. And therefore, coming from a similar climate to the cancellation of the exhibition of Philip Gaston, I believe it is almost like the opposite process with the opposite result, but both actions are born in a similar climate. Okay, so this is my text, the idea of a culture war. We are in the middle of a culture war. As I say, I'm just throwing ideas that I have been thinking for some time in relation to this idea of new institutions, how to change institutions, what role education has to play in its changing and renaming of art institutions. I do not necessarily assert anything, but I really throw these ideas for debate and for discussion among us in these 3 days. So we are in the middle of a culture war, in a culture of the apology of avoiding conflict for fear of igniting a real war. We are not getting the tools we need for honest debate and discussion. We are avoiding subjects and unnecessary confrontation. How to create a climate that allows real representation of subjectivities without falling in the trap of there are fine people on both sides, which is, as you know, the famous sentence of Donald Trump when speaking about the white supremacy demonstrations and attacks. There are fine people on both sides. Probably education has something to do with it, but also how to be efficient politically. And then I got to, I don't know, just to this book of Jodi Dean, which I have recently read, and that I thought it was, that made a big impression on me, and that I thought that it was especially apt to discuss in a Russian context. Jodi Dean, Comrade. And also in relation to the work I have been doing on Alexandra Kollontai, we will get to that later on. I think I need to check the time, but I don't speak too long. But Jody Dean Comrade concept. Here what follows are quotes of this book of Comrade by Jody Dean, which is a very nice design. I don't know if you have read this book, but these here are some quotes from this book. Comradeship is about our responsibility to each other, a responsibility that makes us better and stronger than we could ever be alone. We are missing a political relation built on solidarity. Comradeship is what allows us to build a shared political capacity. Everyday people, which is a kind of myth that has been constructed, at least in Spain and in the different areas that I am part of since the 2011, the Indignados and the 15M movements here in Spain, and occupying movements, the idea of everyday people, like everyday people finally taking their destiny in their hands and acquiring political weight. Jody Dean says about this concept of the everyday people, we'll never magically achieve political change. We must aim for unity and discipline. We need disciplined organization, the discipline of comrades committed to common struggle for an emancipatory, egalitarian future. The opposition between survivors and systems, this is a criticism of Jody Dean to the current climate, the idea of survivors and systems. This gives us a left devoid of politics. The concept of survivor points to being unique and individual defeating the odds. The concept of systems is something too large to comprehend, leaves us with the impossibility of truly transformational politics. Comrade and comradeship brings us, on the contrary, to a horizon of possibility. The concept of comradeship points above all to the feeling of belonging. And then when I was reading this book, of course, I was pointing to, this is a picture I'm sorry, I forgot, I wanted to have a real one with me, but a book that I published very loosely on the work of Alexandra Kollontai, and especially around the concept of the new woman and of comradely love. This is a book with two fake covers, Love with Obstacles, and under it the real title, which is Amor Rojo in Spanish, Red Love. And from this, Jody Dean quotes as the only communist thinkers that debated or that underlined the concept of comrade as the basis of communism was Alexander Kollontai and Gorky, Maxim Gorky. And so from this is the quote of Alexander Kollontai from Make Way for Winged Arrows, written in 1922, which is the concept that is kind of at the basis of this book I did of Amor Rojo, Red Love. The new communist society is being built on the principle of comradeship and solidarity. Solidarity is not only an awareness of common interests, it depends also on the intellectual and emotional ties linking the members of the collective. For a social system to be built on solidarity and cooperation, it is essential that people should be capable of love and warm emotions. All these warm emotions, sensitivity, compassion, sympathy, and responsiveness, derive from one source. They are aspects of love, not in the narrow sexual sense, but in the broad meaning of the word. The proletariat should also take into account the psychological and social role that love, both in the broad sense and in the sense of relationships between the sexes, can and must play, not in strengthening family and marriage ties, but in development of collective solidarity. And then from this quote of Alexander Kollontai and the notion of love, which derives as a political force opposed or built against the family and marriage ties, which for her are a matter of the past. This quote of that Jody Dean does of Angela Davis' decision to join the Communist Party in the US. This Angela Davis says, I wanted an anchor, a base, a mooring. I needed comrades with whom I could share a common ideology. I was tired of ephemeral ad hoc groups that fell apart when faced with the slightest difficulty. Tired of men who measured their sexual height by women's intellectual genuflexion. It wasn't that I was fearless, but I knew that to win, We had to fight, and the fight that would win was the one collectively waged by the masses of our people and working people in general. I knew that this fight, sorry, there's a lot of force here, that this fight had to be led by a group, a party with more permanence in its membership and structure and substance in its ideology. So Jody Dean underlines, indeed, work determined not by the markets, but by shared commitments becomes fulfilling. We come to the quotes of the end of the quotes of the Jody Dean comrade. Jody Dean says, comradeship is a relation among free and equal workers, a universal family, gender neutral, which was a bit exactly, it's a kind of paraphrase of the words as well of Alexandra Kollontai, that comradely love is only possible among equal people. And a family that opens, a concept of the couple, not a family, that opens to society. Comradeship is the vision of a future in which we will all be comrades. I underline this in a future because it's something that will be repeated in this presentation, and I think is key for this discussion we are having, the idea of future, the idea of a visionary, a vision of what is to come. And another thing which is quite interesting in the consideration of Jody Dean is that the comrade is not a citizen. Citizenship is a relation mediated by the state. The state is not the frame of reference of the comrade. Comradeship is independent of the state. In fact, the individualist individual is the symmetrical opposite of the comrade. Comradeship is built on, I underline this, I put it quite big because it will be important for what is to come. Comradeship is built on equality, freedom, solidarity, autonomy, future, utopia, and practicality. So I especially want to underline this idea of utopia, which is related to future, and the idea of practicality, because this is something that it will be quite interesting in the construction of new institutions. The idea that it is not so much has to abandon the notions of theory for going into very concrete uses and ways of how you say in French, mode d'emploi, ways to use the institution. And then from these different concepts that we have, that I have, as I say, thrown at you, of coming from this concept of comradeship by Jody Dean, that is especially interested in relation to the comrade love of Alexandra Kollontai. It is different other two articles that I have read recently. One of them is by Coco Fusco. I have put there, if you want to copy paste, I'm not sure you can copy paste this, but otherwise I'll give you later the link. We do not need new art, but new institutions. This is quite an challenging statement, which I have been thinking about for some time in relation, there is always this paradox when you as an artist, and I guess many of you have a lot of things to say about that, when you as an artist try to engage, like Philip Gaston did, to try to go away from this idea of warring of the blue and red composition. I make reference to the quote of Philip Gaston at the beginning. I want really to engage with reality. I want to engage with people. Want to transcend, I think this is key, the circuit of contemporary art, to reach to other spectators that are not necessarily the spectators of contemporary art. And in this sense, it comes again and again, time and time again, a frustration, because most of the time, or 99% of the time, all these projects are mediated by institutions. And somehow these institutions, they seem to suck out the power of these projects in different ways. And then you come to this kind of paradoxical situation in which, because you are protected by the art atmosphere or by the art institution, you can almost do anything. You can get away with murder, in the sense that you will probably not be arrested or put in jail even if you stage a demonstration. But at the same time, this protection that is given to you by the art institution kind of blunts any kind of sharpness that the project may have. And this is a big frustration. To the point that you start thinking, and here Coco Fusco is this kind of zeitgeist thing, probably we don't need art. We don't need new art. We don't need to keep on trying again and again to transcend this institution, but we just plainly need to change the institutions. We have to make new institutions. These new institutions, and this is where I come back and why I thought the comrade text of Jody Dean was interesting, especially if we see it as the legacy of texts by, for instance, Kollontai, will not stem from the state. These new institutions will not stem from the state and nor from private patrons. These new institutions need to stem from equality, freedom, solidarity, autonomy, future, utopia, and practicality, which of course sounds very much like something that you put on a t-shirt, but it is worth to consider it, exactly what we mean by these terms if we take them away from the t-shirt, you know, equality, freedom, solidarity, autonomy, future, utopia, practicality. Because all institutions do not work and no new art will change that. We need to build those new institutions as a community. And in this sense, Judith Dean's figures of the comrade is useful for this. And then I was thinking, I don't know if this is a lot of my prejudice, but I was thinking that all this talk about comrade and communists, it sounds like kind of trite when speaking to a Russian audience. And then I thought that, you know, we have now we have sexier models for all this idea of socialism and this. And I was thinking of course, of the Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez on the cover of Time magazine, and this comment of Al Jazeera. The US is witnessing the future of politics and a new generation of leaders who are providing a new vision for the nation and resistance to the policies of Donald Trump. If the US Democratic Party is to have a future, and if American democracy itself is to have a fighting chance against the forces of authoritarianism, that future is Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Ocasio-Cortez, 28, appended the New York political landscape, blah, 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 want to over the established, or like the old establishment of the Democratic Party, to become a leading figure in Congress, and not only her, but also as part of a group of female constituents that are not, how to say, afraid of using the word socialism when they speak about new policies in the States. And then I was thinking of linking to a YouTube video, but then I thought this is a bit too much propaganda on Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. But I thought it was nice to say, because it's a confrontation on television between her and another female conservative politician, in which she speaks as something, the conservative politician says something like, you know, here in the States, we will never be socialist. We will never end up like, I think they say Venezuela and I don't know what other horror country they are using as a model to say that socialist does not work. And then the answer to that, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez says, well, you know, it is a fiction that capitalism works. If we take into account the level of poor Americans, people who do not, the 60% of Americans do not, are just at the border of the poverty border, and they will never have any chance to get over it. They are missing basic, the richest country in the world as unable to feed their citizens, etc., etc. So if you tell me communist doesn't work, then I can tell you capitalist doesn't work either. So this, I thought that it would be a nice intermezzo when speaking with a certain, how to say, enthusiasm from my part of the notion of comradeship and comradely love, to say that I know that this has a certain baggage, but it's nevertheless interesting to know that in the present circumstances, especially when figures like Trumpism, what it has been called Trumpism, has become a new reality that no one wanted to believe 4 years ago. It really comes as a sort of shock for many people. This has given, has created the possibility for a new generation to speak about socialism without being, how you say, sent out of the room immediately. And this is kind of interesting for what we are discussing here. And then from Coco Fusco, I wanted to go to another article that has kept me thinking for the last months, on the biennial ruins inhabiting the void, covering the distance by Marco Paravale. And now here I'm really going to quote generously this text, because I think you can easily find it just by the title, because I think it's really a fantastic text. The same way that Trumpism made possible that socialists could be named again in contemporary political discourse, the crisis of COVID and the cancellation of so many events, this time really cancellation because of health reasons, like the Venice Biennial and so many others, you all know, so many biennials, so many events, this one as well, kind of left space to think. When everybody, the first wave of the pandemic, the second wave of the pandemic, everybody said, well, you know, it will be temporary, we will get back. And then more and more people started to think, we will get back to what exactly? What is exactly what we want to get back to? And in this article of Marco Paravales, he reflects on the phenomenon of biennial and what exactly is it possible, and how will it change the concept of the biennial. So here I quote from Marco Paravale, and I read with you. In the next few years, tourism, mobility, art, logistics will radically change. How do we want to transform what Gregory Solete refers to our bare art worlds? We should not leave neoliberalism free to operate its own adjustment. We should not permit it to go back and operate in favor of the business and the markets. An endless spiral of accumulation at the expense of hypermobile crowds with privilege, exploitation, precarity, and poverty cohabit and overlap. Now we can think of something new. Do we really want to move towards the nightmare of a rarefied scenario made of online auctions where art objects prices rise together with their status of safe haven assets? Online art schools with same fees and depths, yet easier discipline under the slogan of innovation plus individualization, where the contemplation dispositive of the white cube shifts from the ritual to the medical, becoming in the name of social distancing a space even more exclusive than before, the reassuring sanitized space ready to welcome the rich global elite of potential buyers. This pandemic is but the current precipitation of a larger and older crisis that makes this about capitalism as a peculiar ecological regime. Nonetheless, it is time to recognize that the late 90s great leap forward in the art world, where my generation comes from, for instance, whose advantages even some of us may have enjoyed too, with this utopian image of a world as an interconnected archipelago of dialoguing differences, like, for example, the powerful assemblage glissant Orbis Utopia Station, was indeed realized. Yet this achievement was the result of a plan based on the nature of capitalism, where, borrowing Mauricio Lazzarato expression in a recent public talk and insisting on the metaphor of the archipelago, a few islands of abstract labor are surrounded by an ocean of exploitation, and, I may add, extractivism. We need a social, political, and financial shift. We also need new narrations. We need art spaces to be inhabited by new epistemologies. A few years ago, in one of my articles, I repeat, this is Marco Paravale speaking, I addressed the issue of what I define as alter institutionalism. I divide alter institutions in two main categories: government, well, I can say government, well, from the government, alter institutions, often temporary and created by artists. And I think, you know, I can recognize myself a lot in this. And autonomous alter institutions founded by artists together with other people during social movements, outbreaks, often in occupied urban spaces, abandoned institutes, and or old archives. Even if also official art institutions, at least the public ones, with various degrees of success or failure, can deliberately choose to trigger processes of self-alter institutionalization, he puts the example of Internazionale, it is no time to rely on those institutions' goodwill. For example, La Biennale considerably developed its educational activities. Large part of the audience, he explains here a series of activities taken by the biennial, especially after the 2000, to connect with the territory of Venice. And then he says, paradoxically, the same reformist nature of its governance makes it work as an important ideological function in the neoliberal Venice territory, providing to it a critical extension, a space where art is free to express its critical subjective potential in a progressive corporate environment, while at the same time avoiding any direct role and real attempt to criticize tourist extractivists. And as I say here, I can recognize myself as having been several times in the Venice Biennial. In the 3 times I have been there, being so extremely frustrated about everything. I am finishing now with a quote of Marco Baravalle. Only a social mobilization will be able to modify this institutional mentality. The revolution of art institutions could only be initiated by and will only march parallel to a much wider revolution, a revolution able to make significant steps forward on different yet interconnected grounds: the achievement of a universal basic income and new housing rights, a serious commitment on climate justice towards the end of extractivism, the reconstruction of a democratic healthcare system damaged by decades of privatizations, the end of gender, race, class, and species asymmetries, all elements that structure and permeate the current social, financial, and political order. As art workers, we must be aware that we have a role to play, yet this is not a challenge to be faced from within the short horizon of art professionalism. That being said, the question is, in what direction should we push to open up the crisis of the neoliberal art event to the point that it will turn into something different? And these are the 4 proposals of Marco Baravalle: the context, from the creative to the caring city; the event, from exhibition to habitation; mobility, from entrepreneurial nomadism to radical permanence; and the archive, from La Biennale history to the histories for the future biennial. So this is, as I underline, speaking about the Venice Biennial, and here already I think we have some of the elements that we spoke before about when we spoke of the comrade concept. This idea of the future, this idea of the future as how to say, is always building something always with the idea that it is to come. And as well, this idea of the from exhibition to habitation, that we will, the idea that you, how to say, that of belonging. So not something that you either exclude yourself. The idea of exhibition, which when you speak of the Venice Biennial, it's very clear. Most of the artists who exhibit there have hardly any say or control on all the surrounding apparatus that surrounds their work. It is a real effort to try to control the context and the way the work is mediated. So how to change this kind of double exclusion from the artist and from the public into a habitation, a place where everybody is able to everybody, all the people in that integrated in that event are able to be there at the same time, to inhabit the place. So these are the 4 proposals of Marco Baravalle for a new biennial built from the biennial ruins. And here I come to some considerations that are taken from the reading of a text by Manuel Borja Villel, which I also gave you, in which he speaks about the museum and how the museum should be. And this is not really a quoting of Manuel Borja Villel text, but rather a kind of paraphrasing of how I think, or the kind of thoughts that this text has provoked in me. So now we are not anymore in the realm of the quote, and I also have decided that it would be nice to have some images of my own work as a kind of background for these statements, because in a way they relate to them. It's not only decoration. I think in a way it relates to them. So the idea of new institutions that we are discussing here, how to create new institutions, because the old ones don't work. So it is not really that it is almost as if we have no choice. So it is not that we should create an alternative, it's that the old ones don't function anymore. And it is just a question of who makes the new ones. So these new institutions should have, logically, education at the very center of these new institutions. I'm sorry, with all this, I hardly can read my own. Yeah, the museum. I don't know. I don't really know what you see, but I take that you see the text, right? Yes. So, kind of comments on or thoughts provoked by the text of the museum question by Manuel Borja Villar. The art institution is a place of consumption and consensus, generating new forms of sociability. But are they democratic? Are these institutions, art institutions, democratic? The museum, what Manuel Borja Villar says, is the museum serves to reinforce the established order. This is something that art is as intellectual as educational institution. This is something that has also haunted me since I read Crimini di Pace, the Basaglia, which is a text, Basaglia, that was a psychiatrist, an Italian psychiatrist, and I did a work almost 10 years ago on the how do you say, subversion of the psychiatric institutions that Basaglia made. He published a book that was called Crimine di Pace, in which he denounced the role of intellectuals in preserving or keeping the status quo, which is an idea of Gramsci that he comments from Antonio Gramsci. But as well as we can read from Paulo Freire and the Pedagogy of the Press. Is that the title? Yes, Pedagogy of the Press. The educational institution as well, it is thought to preserve the status quo. So in itself, to change the art institution is also to change this status quo. That's what Paulo Freire was aiming at with the Pedagogy of the Press. So the museum as well is an institution of that parallel to the movement of intellectual, and the educational institution serves to reinforce the established order. The museum, the art institution, so Manuel Borja says the museum, I say on a wider sense, the art institution, which we are part as well of, is based on a narrative and a public that appropriates a narrative or that buys that narrative. So you propose a narrative, and the success, what is understood as success of the artistic event or of the artist is that the public buys into that narrative. So you have this kind of circle of narrative mediation structures, public narrative mediation structures, and so on and so forth. In between these three elements, the narrative of the art institution is constructed. And then Manuel Borja says there are two types of museums. One, it will be the modernist museum. The prototype is the Museum of Modern Art of New York, which is linear, progress-based, hierarchic, Eurocentric, androcentric structure, white cube, decontextualizing the artworks. The artworks in this white cube are as images suspended on a blank page. It's a type of museum that doesn't want any polemics. It stays away from polemics. It's above all sorts of confrontation, and works for an art for the ages, for the eternal artwork. Another second type of museum, these are the types of museums that are contemporary, so that are taking place right now. The Spectacle Museum, specialized in blockbuster exhibitions and mass cultural tourism, merchandising rag to riches marginal figures like the Van Gogh Museum or the MOOC Museum, if you have visited any of those two institutions, transforming subjectivity into merchandise. They favor polemic. There is no censorship because everything is marketable and consumable. The public transforms into audiences. You will recognize them because you have all this crowd control device. For instance, when you enter the Van Gogh, no, the MOOC Museum and the Van Gogh Museum is like if you enter public transport, there is this kind of system where you put your ticket, your, how you call that, the barcode, and then you enter, and then with this barcode, you can access the different things, and then you go out through the museum shop. So it is really built to control, to crowd control. The infantilization of the public is extremely irritating to read the labels or to read anything that is in the museum because of this. It really sounds like they are talking to, I don't want to say stupid people, but people with absolutely no background. And this is really built for the what is called the big public, but they have a very low opinion of the big public. And so this is the second type of museum according to this text of Manuel Borja Villar. And as I said, these two systems are systems that are, these two models are two models that are, how do you say, they overlap sometimes, often. You have, for instance, the how you say, permanent collection that may respond to the first type, but in the same museum you have the spectacle museum to the temporary presentations. For instance, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam could present a hybrid of the two models, when you have the Modernist Museum for the collection, and in the temporary exhibition you have the spectacle museum. Okay. And then in both types, these both types, they have things in common. One thing in common is the precarity of the workers. So this is something that to me, for instance, it is only started really to dawn on me the horrible labor situation of the workers of the museum when performance started to be overpresent in museums. So you, as in conventional exhibitions, sometimes most of the time the artist is protected from this realization because you only deal with a curator and you have no access to any other collectives or any other groups in the museum. When museums start to show performance and you as a performance provider have to present this performance, the first workers you have to, how you say, to protect are your own performers. Because of these performers that are contracted by the museum, but you have, you say, they are brought by you, then you start to discover all the inner workings of the museum, and then you realize what a terrible situation most people who work in a museum have. It is not so much because of the, how you say, because they are evil, the people who run the museum. 90% of the people who are in the museum have a similar situation. So you have the fake self, the fake, how you call that? Freelance, the fake freelance. So that means somebody who goes there to work every day but has no social protection at all. You have overwork, people who do overwork hours that are not properly paid for overworking hours. You have in general very, very low salaries. And this is something that is common to both types of museums, and something that that I think only very recently, at least in my case, I have come to realize because of the bigger engagement that performance presentation produces. Another thing which I already spoke about is the invisibility of the workers. So unless you, for your circumstances of performance artists, are really engaged with the laboral situation of the museum, you won't see any of this. You will never come to confront it with the precarity of the workers. Another thing which is common to both types is the ghettification. I'm not sure if I wrote this properly. I don't think so. You know, the ghettification is not the Paul Getty, but rather that it becomes a ghetto, you know, that the South and the other, whenever they are presented by the museum, they are in very clear outlined spaces, mediated for the grand public to understand how South and how other those things are. And finally, that they are always based on the passivity of the audiences, on something that has to be a kind of service that had to be served to audiences without expecting any reaction or any sort of feedback from those audience, other than fake feedback of what Judy Dean calls communication capitalism, like likes or Instagram post or etc., etc. And then how should they be, these new institutions, these museums that we want to construct? So here are some things that I just noted down, but I'm sure we could together think of much more than that, is that they should present not one but many possible narratives. They should break out with any linear narrative, any unique foundational myth. They should invent new forms of mediation. They should address the spectator as an equal, an adult, an agent, a political subject, and they should subvert the promise of happiness made to the spectator. So this idea of the promise of happiness which I think I did not mention before. That's also something, a kind of idea that it has been on my mind for a long time, is this: when you see the marketing of museums or of institutions, art institutions, they always have this idea that you would improve yourself by going to the institution. So it is something that that you need, like you need to go to a spa, or like you need to go, I don't know, to any kind of self-care. This myth of the self-care is something that you need to take care of yourself, to take time for yourself. You go to the museum, and then they promise they have this horizon of happiness in which somehow you will. It is a kind of actualization of the catharsis, old catharsis concept. Everything, all the suffering that you have accumulated in your the shitty life that most of us have, it will be forgotten in the museum. And so we have to subvert this promise of happiness to turn it into something different, to this cathartic moment. And going back to the Jody Dean text of comradeship, they should definitely create a sense of belonging to this. And this is a quote from Acteur de le théâtre son double, the theater and its double, over the one of the, as I said, these are all images of situations I created in exhibitions I did, and this is a performance called Rehearsal Retrospective. And indeed, for me, this idea of actor, perhaps the theater poison injected into the social body disintegrates it. Indeed, the performance, one of the interests of performance, which is a kind of catchword that means many different things, but for the sake of discussion, let's call it performance. Indeed, it has made possible all these things that I have named as something desirable for the institution, to address the spectator as an equal, an adult, an agent, a political subject. The idea to occupy the same space and time than the spectator, and to address this spectator directly, and to somehow break the famous breaking of the fourth wall in a excessive way, to the point that the public and the author, if you want, occupy exactly the same space, congregate in exactly the same space. Education that allows a museum to transition from a place for the specialists. This is from the specialists into a place for the public, from a place for leisure, entertainment, and sociability into a place for action, agency, and constituency, cannot be told by a form of education based on inequality. So if we are thinking of the museum, of the art institution, as a transitional space that goes from the specialists into the public, from the leisure into action, it has to be told, because we are referring to this idea of the narratives, by a form of education which, as I say, cannot be based on inequality. Education must be part of a pedagogy of emancipation, of two ignorants teaching one another. So to use the figure by Garcia, the ignorant schoolmaster. On equality, duality, and community. So what kind of pedagogy we want to use to create this new institution that has to be a new model of transitional model, as I say, that has all this going from one place to the other, from specialist to public, from leisure to action, from entertainment to agency, from sociability to constituency, all these kind of things. So the pedagogy has to do this, but a new form of pedagogy. And I had to move again because I can't read my text. Oops. The artwork is the place where author and spectator meet. An enigmatic signifier, radical and ambiguous. Well, I'm sorry, this is very, I did not think of all this. I don't know if you see what I'm seeing, but I'm all the time moving things around in order to be able to read the text that I wrote. The artistic experience is a transitional phenomenon. We go from one place to another. The artwork must keep a certain opacity. This is something that is really a kind of idea for consideration, because as I say, I do not have, I'm not really sure of this. But when I was speaking about the frustration that many artists in the same situation of Philip Gaston feel that you have to somehow break the circuit of the contemporary art audience in order to have a certain impact in reality, to have a certain impact in a public. You always, of course, run the risk, or there is a certain risk in how to say, overstepping too much into the pedagogic. So that means to trying too hard to explicitly say what you think is urgent. And as I was saying, this is a kind of eternal dilemma, which was as well in the minds of many. Did it stay or coffee? No, sorry. That was in the minds of many people in the same situation. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Brecht, when you speak of Brecht, and the idea that actually you need, paradoxically, you need a very sophisticated form in order to reach a certain content. I'm not being very clear, but maybe we can discuss about this later. Well, the way I formulate it is that the artwork must keep a certain opacity to subvert this promise of happiness, to turn it into a promise of new knowledge. But this new knowledge is not pre-existing, is not given from the one who has it, the author, to the one who does not have it, the public, but is a knowledge to be created in this transitional moment that is the artistic experience. It does not pre-exist. It is not a knowledge that pre-exists the artistic experience, but it is created by the encounter of this author artwork public. A pedagogy of emancipation must free the museum and the art institution from authoritarianism, academia, and the market. And I think this is the end. I mean, it sounds, it's like very long, no? Because when you speak alone, it's kind of hard. So I hope that we can go into some sort of feedback here. This is also the end of the text by Manolo Borja Villar. He said we should go from the collection to the archive. This is a kind of an interesting thing, especially if we know how important the model of the archive has been in the last 20 years or maybe 30 years in contemporary art. But what is interesting, apart from adopting the model of the archive, is that to go into this model would mean that you go from owning, which is the idea of collection, to the idea of administering, preserving, and keeping. Emancipatory education will turn museums into archives with infinite possibilities of replication and structuring. And that is the end of my PowerPoint. As I was hoping that from this we could go to a conversation, a question, and maybe to clarify some items that perhaps were obscure